Hello, everyone. This is Attorney Robyn McCoy, and with Attorney Tracy Martin, and we're showing our coffee, and we have our special guest, Attorney Arnold Reed, and so this is Political Coffee with Robyn and Tracy, and a special guest. So let's get the party started. For my I don't drink coffee, so I've got tea. I've got I got echinacea, vitamin C, and some lemon in here. So what do you have in your? Well, welcome Tracy, and welcome Attorney Arnold Reed. What do you guys have in your coffee mugs?
Yes, I defer to Attorney Arnold Reed because he's our special guest, and looked like he had a pretty cool mug when we were leading up to going live. So good afternoon, Attorney Reed, and what are you drinking today?
Good afternoon, Tracy Robyn. I have coffee. It's a special blend. It's a Detroit Bold. You can get it from many Kroger's, and my mug says, "A good day is ahead. First coffee. A good day is ahead. First coffee." I wanted this to be my first cup of coffee with you guys. Usually I do it in the morning, but this is such a special occasion. I saved my first cup for you all.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you. We feel so honored. That is so cool. And I have to check out that special blend. And where did you say you could find that? Because I am a coffee drinker.
You can get it at Kroger's. Any Kroger's. It's called Detroit Bold. It's the Keurig kind that comes in the K-cup. And it's in a blue, black, and white box. It's very, very good.
Ooh, it sounds yummy. I'm going to check that out. And thank you for the hot coffee tip because I do drink coffee. And today I did bring with me my favorite peace mug because I am wishing for peace all across the United States of America. You know, we have a hot topic today. We're going to be talking about police brutality in America and, you know, on the path to solving the problems of excessive force in America. Will we be able to sustain peace? So that's perhaps a question that you can answer, Attorney Reed, as we get into our discussion. But I have nothing in my mug today. I did bring an iced coffee with me today, and it is cafe. No, this is hazelnut. This is a hazelnut blend. It's got lots of ice, and it's pretty yummy. And I love coffee because it gives me a little energy boost.
Right. I do tea, cocoa, hot cocoa, and that's my. I've never been a coffee person. But I have Wonder Woman too, because I love Wonder Woman. I have the animated Wonder Woman, the adult Wonder Woman. I have Wonder Woman outfits. I'm just I know Tracy, when I was looking at your bio earlier today, I saw you were a big Wonder Woman fan too. So I'm like, we definitely need some more woman power in the world to help heal the world. So
we're the Wonder Woman sisters.
Yes. So Attorney Reed, so I did look at your bio, and you have a pretty impressive bio. And I'm going to just get it started with some of the basic questions. Like, so what made you decide to become a lawyer?
Wow. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for having me. I think this is a very important show, very important discussion, very, very apropos to what's going on in America, in cities, in some aspects around the world. So thank you very much for having me. The reason I wanted to become a lawyer, if I could point to one single reason, this would have been early in the 70s. I was walking home from school with a friend, and we had our books, and we were just talking, and the police rolled up on us, and I had a green jacket on. They pulled out their guns, and I think I might have been in 6th grade, and they demanded that we get in the car. And my first instinct was to break and run. Where I grew up, you ran from the police. They didn't come to get the squirrels off your roof, right, or remove cats out of the trees. So my first instinct was to run. My friend didn't run. He froze and started crying. So I said, man, I can't leave him. The long and short of it was they took us around to a white gentleman's home. And they said, are these the ones that robbed your home at gunpoint? And the guy looked in the car and he said, no. And one of the cops said, you sure this one right here, talking about me, has a green coat on, just like the one you said? And the white guy looks at the cop and says, this is a baby in the car. You have kids in this car. I told you it was a grown man. So they threw us out the car, and we had to walk back to piece up our papers and books. So that was one of my earliest influences negatively with law enforcement that really started piquing my interest in studying government and wanting to really become a lawyer, because but for the grace of God go I. Had that man said, yeah, that's him, I probably wouldn't be on this show now.
And how old were you? How old were you when that happened?
We were probably in 6th grade.
Okay.
So you were only about 11 years old.
Yes.
And
that was my first bad experience with the police.
Wow. That had to have obviously left an impression on you. And was there another incident? I was reading up on you doing some research, and I thought there was another incident where you said that at one point in your life, early in your life, you actually stared down the barrel of a gun and you witnessed some sort of criminal incident that was happening.
Essentially what happened was every summer I would go visit relatives, and one of my relatives lived on 38th and South Park, which is, back then it was right across from the Ida B. Wells housing project, right next to King Drive in Chicago.
Okay.
So there was a dispute essentially that broke out on 38th and South Park. There was a park that separated it from King Drive, and one guy shot another guy. Everybody takes off running. And I was scared, and the shooter walked right past me, looked me in the face, and disappeared up into the Ida B. Wells. Only when the ambulances and stuff started, I started hearing that, I was able to get up and snap to myself and run like everybody else did. And I mean, you have these influences in your life that, make you think a certain way about law enforcement. But I also understood that law enforcement, it's the individual police officer, not law enforcement as a whole. My dad was an auxiliary police officer.
Really?
Yes.
Now, I find that interesting. I find that interesting because in reading up on you, I saw this article and it described you as the baddest SOB in the game. And that stands for son of a barber. And so your dad was both an auxiliary police officer and also a barber by trade. Is that correct?
That's correct. My dad had a barber shop, and there started to be crime in the area. So a way to keep that down and protect the barbershop, he volunteered to be an auxiliary police officer to patrol the area where the barbershop was. It made sense to him. So he had a department issue 38, a baton, the whole, workup.
Okay.
And he would patrol the area, and he did that for about 8 or 9 years, absolutely free. They called it an auxiliary police officer. But yeah, his full-time job was a barber.
Okay, because there has been discussion. I mean, if you've been following the news reports about some of the changes people have talked about with the police forces, and I know some places have talked about defunding the police and having more community policing as an option to dealing with some of these atrocities we've seen. I mean, I don't know if you've been following the news. I saw the 75-year-old white man that was pushed down by the police, and they tried to initially say he was tripped until they had video footage. And then, I know we'll get into some more discussion about, about Arbery. It's like you can't jog while black. George Floyd, he was driving while black. And then, I don't know if they, and then Breonna Taylor, she's in her home. You can't even be in your house while black. It's just, it just seems like it's in. And
Arnold Taylor, Arnold Reed, Attorney Reed was just walking to school while black when he gets picked up with his classmate and gets thrown in the back of a police car. So that had to have had some major impact on your perspective in handling these police misconduct cases, because you've handled a wide array of police misconduct cases and you've won some major verdicts. I mean, I added up all of the verdicts that you won. Now, these weren't completely or all police misconduct cases, but it amounted to $14.25 million. That's big. And I understand that when you were only 29 years old, Attorney Reed, you won this huge police misconduct case. Talk to us more about that.
Yeah, I had not been out of law school that long, and essentially what had happened in this particular case is the head of the household was a gentleman, and I won't call his name, it's a matter of public record, but this gentleman witnessed a burglary essentially across the alley. He called the police, and the police took their time about coming, and he went on to the gym to go work out. So in the time that he went to the gym to go work out, the police apprehended the suspects, brought them to the home where the call came from, didn't take them to the station, brought them to the home. Well, his wife didn't know he had called, didn't know her husband called. She comes to the door, looks right in the suspects' faces. The cop said, "Did you call on these guys for, breaking in homes across the alley?" She said, "I don't know what you're talking about." So they didn't take the suspects to the station. They took them home. Later that night, those same suspects firebombed that house with the family inside. And so we brought a lawsuit. Thank God no one was killed. But we sued the police for police misconduct in that situation. But the list goes on. Before there was Ahmaud Arbery, before there was Trayvon Martin, before there was George Floyd, there was Ernest Grigglin. We sued the police and secured almost a $2 million settlement. He was a diabetic on the freeway.
Where was that? Where did that occur?
Dearborn.
Okay, Dearborn. Okay.
Dearborn. Okay.
And they pulled him over and beat this man. And they claimed that he was reaching for a gun, but he was reaching for his insulin pump that was, already surgically put into his body so he could just press a button. He was going through a hypoglycemic episode. They mistook him for being drunk. They beat this man beyond, I'm telling you, it was bad. He lingered for 12 to 18 days in a coma, and he died.
Oh my gosh,
Before that
intense.
was Quantrell Pryor, and this case was a young man that swallowed cocaine at the mall. When he swallowed cocaine at Fairlane Mall, instead of taking him to the hospital, they took him to jail, and he died. Now, after that case, the police didn't have cameras in the car anymore, which came back to haunt me with the Ernest Grigglin case, because when the Dearborn police was involved in that, they didn't have cameras in the car, because after I used the cameras against them in Quantrell Pryor's case, they took them out. So we didn't have the video that you see nowadays. The cell phones, people weren't filming things back then.
There was no dash cam. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, no dash cam or body cameras that were mandatory at that time. Yes.
I take it that you're all for body cams right now, but one of the problems that keeps coming up is that these cops, they keep turning off the body cams when it's convenient for them, for their own self-serving purposes. And so, there's been a lot of talk about police reform now. And what's your opinion on police reform? You see a lot of people protesting all across the country, but not only that, as you mentioned earlier in the intro, across the world. And there are a lot of people upset, and we are apparently seeing a lack of white silence, as they call it. But is this just happening now in the present moment? Will this movement, this momentum be sustained, and will real change occur in terms of police reform? What do you think?
Real change has to occur, and what I don't want to see is this movement, when it's over, because all movements come to an end, that we go back to the same old situation. I mean, we have the governor that is out there in the forefront doing a good job from what I can see at this point, at least rhetoric-wise. But what you can't see is on my cell phone, there is a statute, and it's a law, Michigan Law 764.16. It allows a civilian to make a citizen's arrest and use deadly force if you run. You can be shot by a civilian effectuating an arrest if you've committed a felony or they witness you committing a felony. That is law on the books. I'm telling you, that is law on the books.
So that needs to change too. That needs to be reformed.
That's right.
Right, and I was earlier today. I was on the phone. I talked to my state rep and my state senator. I don't know if you're familiar with State Senator Jeff Irwin as well. He has some pending legislation, but I was talking to them about, like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't know if you saw Congress has some proposed legislation to get rid of the chokeholds, to track the police stops, and so they had a whole list. Hakeem Jeffries is leading the challenge on the federal side, and what I expressed to my state rep is Christy Pagan, and my state senator is Erica Geis. Is like, what are we doing here as a state? We need to be doing things on a state level, And which brings me to the question of, how do you feel about qualified immunity? Because that's something they said that it's supposed to go before the Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas, of all people, that he thinks that they should take away the immunity for the police. I mean, and if that could be a deterrent, because right now they have immunity, so it's like, and they have the training, and so it's like some of them think that they can just do whatever they want. Like prime example, the white man that's the protester. When I saw that video, I feel bad when I see anybody getting killed or beaten by the police, or anybody really. But that just was so graphic. I was just, so what's your thoughts on qualified immunity?
Well, let me say this, and then we'll get directly to qualified immunity. The what needs to be done at the local level is to curtail a citizen's ability to use deadly force. It's okay if you want to effectuate, quote unquote, a citizen's arrest, but these laws came about when we didn't have police radio, there was no cell phone, no GPS. In other words, these laws that allowed this came about because the theory was police couldn't be everywhere. But now with technology, you don't need these type of laws, and they need to be amended because the average person doesn't have the training to know when and how to use force. All right, so let me say that. Now, let's get to qualified immunity. First of all, that's a good thought, but qualified immunity is never going to be watered down. It just simply is not.
Well, first, for our lay people, what is qualified? What's your understanding of qualified immunity?
Qualified immunity is simply this. It shields a police officer from harm in terms of a federal lawsuit unless they commit a violation that is a clearly established prohibition in the Constitution. It has to be a clearly established law that has been violated. What do I mean when I say that? Let's say the police officers see someone or the jail guard sees someone that needs medical attention. The right to medical attention for an inmate is a clearly established law. If you fail to get an inmate medical attention, then you are not protected by immunity because that's a clearly established law that you violated. Let me give it to you in another context so your listeners can understand this. There was a case, I believe it was in Alabama, where they took these prisoners, tied them to a post, shackled them to a post outside in like 100-degree weather. There was no law that says you couldn't do that specific act. So qualified immunity was the argument when one of these inmates died that the police or the guards raised. But the court astutely said, oh no, that particular act is not prescribed. But there are laws against torture and abuse of inmates. Those laws are clearly defined. So we're going to use those laws to prosecute you. So that's basically a way police officers can get off the hook by saying, well, whatever we did wasn't clearly established, wasn't clearly defined in the law. And one other aspect of it, it's a discretionary aspect of the law. When a police officer uses his or her discretion, they want officers to be able to use broad discretion. So this applies when a police officer is using his or her discretion. The other aspect of this is they look at it from a reasonable officer's perspective and not our perspective as citizens. What do I mean when I say that? When a police officer comes up to you or accosts you, the events escalate and the police officer shoots you or discharge or uses a taser or uses any kind of force. Under this qualified immunity, they look at it legally from the officer's perspective, not from our perspective. What would a reasonable officer had it done? And if a jury thinks a reasonable officer should have shot you, then that person is going to get off and there's not going to be a civil suit. So those are the aspects of this qualified immunity that shield police officers from any type of civil liability unless it's a clearly established violation of the law and they act unreasonable.
Right, because that's what I think that's some of the...
Oh, go ahead. Why do you say that it will never be limited? There are calls from Kamala Harris and civil rights activists, Campaign Zero, calling for a limit on qualified immunity, but you say that you don't believe it will ever be limited. I find that interesting when even some of the police unions out here are calling for a limitation on qualified immunity because of virtually no cop can ever really be sued or held accountable for their actions.
They can be sued. That's why we call it qualified. It's not absolute. It's qualified. It offers them a defense. If they engage in excessive force under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, for example, that qualified immunity doesn't apply. The qualified immunity is not absolute. That's why it's qualified. There are exceptions to it. Excessive force, deprivation of life, liberty under the 14th Amendment, failure to provide somebody with medical attention. That's why it's qualified.
I see.
The reason that I feel legally that this is going to stand and be further strengthened is because of the current composition of the United States Supreme Court. I think before this law gets watered down, you'll see somebody climbing Mount Everest backwards in flip-flops. That's my
Interesting.
So you're saying it's because of the composition of the court. I got the impression from the articles out there that Clarence Thomas might be inclined to, I mean, again, we don't know what's in his head, but that he might be inclined to get rid of qualified immunity. And then if you have the 4 liberals on the court, that it could go. So when you're saying the composition, are you saying you don't think he would go that way?
Not based on what Clarence Thomas has done and his opinions when it comes to civil rights. Clarence Thomas has always been pro-law and order, just like when Scalia was on the court, he was. It would surprise me. I would like to be proven wrong, but it would surprise me if Clarence Thomas ever authored a decision that did not support law enforcement and in fact go overboard. That would be
a miracle.
Yeah.
Well, we had a black president in a racist country, so Barack Obama. So anything's possible.
Right.
So in looking at your bio, I see you went to University of Iowa. I wonder, did you know Mr. Dennis Shields, because he was our dean of admissions at the University of Michigan Law School. So did you? I don't know if you went there at the same time that he went there.
Yeah, Dennis Shields was the director of admissions at the time I was at Iowa.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, he's. And what was it like going to law school in Iowa? Because there are probably not a lot of black folk there.
Well, you have to remember, Robyn, I came from Indiana, Bloomington, and one of my teammates, I played football at Indiana, was gunned down. He was shot in the back by the Bloomington police with a .357 Magnum. Denver.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
His name escapes me, but he was shot in the back. And that was my first 2 to 3 weeks on, Denver Smith was his name, my first 2 to 3 weeks on campus. So Indiana was a lot different than Iowa. Iowa was a lot more liberal. Iowa, although it had its problems, a lot more liberal, a lot more laid back than Indiana. But my focus was going to class, getting my education, and getting out of Iowa. And that's what I did. So I was not aware of any kind of overt racism, although you heard about it in the law school per se. But I did my education and I got out of there. But coming from Indiana to Iowa, I have to say was somewhat of a relief. Although we had an incident of racism in the law school where the professors would not call on African Americans in class, and it was very, very obvious. They would get to the person next to you, and then they would skip over you, which led the white students to think we were there on some kind of affirmative action program.
Oh, okay.
But other than that situation, I didn't have any problems in Iowa.
Okay, and then I know we had asked you earlier, what led you, I know we'll get back to police misconduct, but what led you to become a lawyer? Like, how did we get to this place where you're this lawyer doing these high profile cases?
Well, I started as a journalist, and when I worked at the Detroit Free Press, I covered an investiture of a judge, and I can't even remember who it was, but that was back in 1986. And for the first time, I was in a room with not one African-American judge, but 50, 60 African-American judges. And that really left an impression on me. I had really met one African-American lawyer in my whole life up until that point. But when I came to Michigan to work for the Detroit Free Press, it was an eye-opening experience. And that really was kind of the impetus for me to really start thinking about becoming an attorney.
And what was your beat when you worked for the Detroit Free Press? What stories did you cover?
Oh, wow. You name it. I was a city desk reporting intern. So any issues, shootings, homicide, back in those days, obviously there were no cell phones. So we had to sit down in the basement of 1300 Bobia. On the right side was a table with a big blotter we would go through for the Detroit Free Press. And 10 feet to the left of me was the same blotter that the Detroit News reporter would have to go through.
And so, tell people what a blotter is. Like, I know what
blotter is. Like you can walk into the police station. It's a huge notebook and it's full of police reports. You can see, where police were dispatched. Was it a fire? Was it a robbery? And so you'd have to go through there and you'd have to see what you thought was newsworthy. Go put a quarter in the phone, call your editor, tell your editor what you see on the blotter, and they would say, okay, go cover this, go cover that. And if you didn't do that and the Detroit News got the story, you were in trouble.
Wow. And so how long were you a journalist before you decided to go on to law school and become an attorney?
Oh, wow. When I graduated undergrad from Indiana, I had a job in Philadelphia at a major newspaper there. And it was through talking, Robyn, with Dennis Shields that I decided I would go to the University of Iowa. I actually went to a program called the CLEO program at Ohio State.
Oh, okay. I've heard of that.
I went to the CLEO program, and Dennis Shields called me one day, and I told him, well, I've got this great job at this newspaper. And he said, son, do you want to be a journalist or do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to write stories or do you want to be the story? And he hung the phone up. And that stuck with me. So I called this newspaper and told them that I wasn't coming. And you can imagine how that conversation went. And I went on to the CLEO program. And
can you tell our viewers what the CLEO program is?
Back then it was called Council on Legal Education Opportunity. So if you graduated and you could not afford law school, which clearly I could not, my dad was a barber, you could actually compete on this program. And you had real law school classes, tax, con law, property, evidence. You had every class that you were going to be taking in the first year. And it was interesting because all the major schools would come and recruit off of this program. So there were some schools originally that I didn't get into that after I finished, I was like number 3 in the program. These schools began to open up and offer me slots with money. So when I went to the University of Iowa, because I had finished well in this program, I didn't owe any money.
Oh, see, that's good. Like one of our because Tracy and I are both members of Black Women Lawyers of Michigan, and I know Earlene Baggett Hayes, she said she went to, it was like her undergrad and her law school. I want to say it was either, it might have been Minnesota, but because she went there, she got a full ride, and she doesn't have to worry about like those of us that went to some of the bigger, higher profile, like the Michigan, we have student loans, you've got the name, but you still have debt to go with that. So yeah.
Exactly. So you're $200,000-$300,000, in the hole. So that was the biggest factor for me. I had to go somewhere that was going to foot the bill, because back then I didn't have money to fill out the applications.
And I mentor young people. I'm mentoring some young students. I teach a class at EMU, and some of my students now are applying to law school. And that's what I have been counseling them to look at. You can apply to some of the top 10 schools, but also apply to some of the schools like Iowa. I know Dennis Shields, when I went to interview with him, he was pitching University of Iowa. And then I don't know if you know Dean Neely. I did a special program at the John Marshall Law School when I was at the University of Chicago, like a pre-law program, kind of like a Clio. And so they were very big about University of Iowa. They said it was a really good program. And so that's what, when I talk to my students, I talk to them, you got to look at, because I know there are people out there now that want to go law school, and you got to look at the pros and cons. There's benefit. You can go to a high profile school, but sometimes you can get a full ride. Sometimes you can. If you go to somewhere like Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, we had a person in our office. He went to Wisconsin, and you don't have to take the bar exam if you stay there.
I used to have the dean. He's not there anymore. An African-American gentleman on speed dial. When you go to Wisconsin, and you have to meet the strictures. Not only do they pay for it, but they give you a stipend as well.
Okay.
And as you indicated, you don't have to take the bar if you're going to stay in Wisconsin. Now, these are places that people normally wouldn't think about going, but it's great education there.
Right.
And if you go undergrad, my daughter went to Wisconsin for her first year or two. She was there on a soccer scholarship. And with her GPA, she eventually transferred back to Michigan, but with her GPA, she would have been a direct admit into law school and wouldn't even have to take the LSAT. So there's some wonderful programs, wonderful opportunities, and a whole dearth of financial aid for individuals who have the grades and want to go to Wisconsin or Iowa. When I went to Iowa, it was number 10 in the country at that time.
Right. And
I'm glad that you pointed that out, Attorney Reed, because as I understand it, the number of Black applicants to law school is now down, and you're on faculty now at Harvard Law School. Is that correct?
Yeah, I teach in the trial advocacy workshop. I teach people how to do a trial, how to cross-examine witnesses, and basically from front to back.
That's wonderful.
How to do a trial. It's very, very interesting.
And I know when I talked to you the other day, you said that you've tried, as far getting back to the police misconduct, I think you said you've tried about 20 to 30 police misconduct cases, or?
Yes, and I've litigated many more than that. All total, probably in my career, probably between bench trials, jury trials, because I think I was talking to you the other day, I used to work at the defender's office before I came out on my own. I probably had well over 150 trials.
Okay, and then I know you
and
do.
How many depositions? How many?
Okay.
I'm just curious. How many depositions have you taken on the civil end of your practice?
I'm telling you, I couldn't even give you an estimation. It's been
innumerable.
Because when you file a case, a deposition is inevitable, and the case is settled. So you wind up taking depositions on every case that you file, and we file thousands of cases over the years.
Okay, and then you do police misconduct, medical malpractice. What other kind of cases do you do?
We do criminal. We do police misconduct, and I've named some of the cases that we have been involved on, some high-profile cases. In these cases before the Trayvon Martins and the George Floyds and the other individuals that we've recovered. We had a case, for example, Tanisha Gant was her name. She hung herself in River Rouge, and we
in the jail.
In River Rouge, $1.8 million. That was the highest settlement at that time in the country for a jail suicide. And see, this is where the qualified immunity comes in, and you have to know what you're doing to get beyond that and get over that. And we survived that. We sued the firefighters, for example, in the city of
That's
Detroit.
hard to do. That's hard to do and win.
Yeah, it is. We were the first ones to get around the public duty doctrine.
Wow.
And win a major settlement for some individuals who were killed in the fire. And after that fire, they removed the commissioner. They got all new fire trucks. They got 16 new fire trucks for the city of Detroit.
Okay.
This was years ago, because all of the fire trucks that worked, they moved them out to Metro Airport to protect the dignitaries in case it was a fire at Metro Airport. Are you serious?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we were able to get protection for the citizens of Detroit with 16 new fire trucks around the city. We were the first ones to successfully litigate against this company called Velasquez in Livonia. I sued on behalf of 10 people. David Brandon was the CEO at Velasquez before he went to Domino's Pizza. That lawsuit.
Was that a whistleblower case?
That was a sex and race discrimination case.
Okay.
That case resulted in the first African-American general counsel in that company's history, Sandra Robinson, and the workforce increased by 10%, gay, lesbian, African-American, and folks of other, color around the country. So we've had some monumental cases over the years.
And how long have you been practicing as an attorney?
Go ahead.
I was a chief law clerk on the Supreme Court from 91 to 92, I believe. So I've been practicing since 91, 92.
Okay. So you've been practicing for a long time. You've been doing this for a long time. And you said you've tried a number of cases, like the police misconduct cases. And coming back to that topic, what are your thoughts about the chokehold? I know that the Congressman Hakeem Jeffries is talking about putting forth legislation where they would ban the chokehold. And then Paul Butler has a book called Chokehold. I actually read the book. It was pretty informative, talking about police misconduct and issues of that nature. So what's your thoughts about banning the chokehold?
I think we have to start there. That's a start, but it's bigger than the chokehold, okay? On the force continuum, police officers are allowed to use force, and it's a continuum. So in other words, if you come at the police with a broom, it's not really, within that force continuum for them to pull out a gun and use deadly force. They can only meet the force with the force that's, or they can only respond with reasonable force that they're met with. So we've had numerous situations, Robyn, where someone has come at the cops with a broom and they shoot them. Or years ago, I had a case where a guy, he was mentally challenged, was walking around naked in Greektown breaking windows. He had no gun, had nothing. He was gunned down by a state trooper.
Okay.
So if we eliminate the chokehold, yeah, that's a start. We should do that. The police officers, though, we want to be careful. They have to have some type of force that they can use to diffuse situations. It's the training. They have to be trained. They have to be decent. They have to be sensitized to different people from different walks of life. They have to understand when you pull an African-American teenager over, he's going to respond differently than a white teenager, perhaps than a Latino teenager. And when you're in a city like Detroit, Los Angeles, San Diego, you need that training because you're going to have to know that if a African-American teenager says, "What you pulling me over for?" that doesn't mean they're getting smart. That doesn't mean they're recalcitrant. That means they're asking you a question because they probably have had some dealings with law enforcement that haven't been positive. So it's not just a chokehold. They have to do a heck of a lot more because they can eliminate the chokehold and then they find another way to kill African Americans or other people.
Attorney Reed, I know we only have you for a few more minutes, but you indicated just now that it takes more than just chokehold bans. I'm going to read to you some of the aspects that have been thrown out recently, and if you could just give a quick take, yes or no, or a quick comment. Independent review of these police misconduct cases, as they have done in Minneapolis with bringing in Keith Ellison, the Attorney General. What's your take? Independent review, special prosecutors.
Absolutely. You can't have the fox guarding the chicken coop. You need independent people doing it.
Okay. And what about ending the no-knock warrants? That seems pretty obvious.
No, I think police officers have to not announce and have a warrant. There are some situations that police officers have to enter without a warrant, and they have to be exigent circumstances. And those exigent circumstances need to be beyond Joe Blow saying, I saw somebody walk into a house down there without any other independent cooperation.
If somebody's life is in danger, for example, that would be an exigent circumstance?
That's exactly right. But don't use exigent circumstances to get in somebody's house because somebody told you that so-and-so went in there with a joint or some weed. You see what I'm saying?
That's what happened with young Breonna Taylor. That was a no-knock warrant. She was a first responder herself, and now she's dead, and we can never bring her back.
The ironic thing, Tracy, is when her boyfriend returned fire, he didn't know they were the police. They charged him.
I know. That's just crazy. It's just unfortunate. I mean, for me, practicing as a criminal defense attorney, I've been doing it 18 years, and that's what I've expressed concerns about the resisting obstructing charge. I feel like the police kind of throw that in there as a protection. They could, sometimes they're called in and they're making a lawful arrest, but it's like they add that in there. And that's part of why I've been doing these educational programs on what to do when stopped by the police, is to make sure that the public is aware of how to conduct yourself. You can go to my Robyn Legal website. I have them on there, talking about what to do when the police come to your door, what to do when you're in your car, when you're on the street. And, as I've done these programs, the kids over the years have said to me, Miss McCoy, we appreciate that you're doing this because, I'm doing it out of love. I want to help save lives. But they've said to me, what are you doing as far as talking to the police? And so, Attorney Reed, I want to turn it over to you. Like, what, with the work that you've done, have you had some opportunities to engage with the police to talk to them about this training issue? Like, just to try to train them. I know they were talking about it today, training them not to be just open season, that's Ben Crump's book on Black folk, not just trained to kill, but actually be more guardians for people, for Black people, for people in general.
Yes, I trained them in the courtroom when I'm cross-examining on that witness stand. Very good.
I like that idea.
Train the police. We get it on in the courtroom, and after I get through with you ain't trying to arrest nobody else unfairly. See, what happens is when you talk about resisting, obstructing, and opposing, Robyn, that's very important. And I just want to take a couple seconds and say why. Let's assume they pull someone over and they claim that you didn't put the signal on or some minor traffic infraction. And they get in your car and do a bogus search. Well, if you're asking them questions and not complying right away with little commands, they'll charge you with resisting and obstructing.
Correct.
Because they won't find anything illegal in your car. And the reason they want to charge people with that all the time is because they, if you get found guilty or you plead guilty, it takes away your argument that they didn't have probable cause to arrest. So that's why they throw those garden variety of resisting, obstructing, and opposing. If you plead to it, you can't sue the police saying they didn't have probable cause to pull you over. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
That's why they do it. It's the protection that they use to pull people over, Black, white, or whatever, search the car illegally, and then charge you with that, so it's harder for you to come back and sue them. But to answer your question, I'll talk to them in the courtroom. And I talk to them good, and we extract that money from them. And then when we extract that money from them, they clearly understand. Just like when they pulled over a Detroit sergeant. David Marshall was coming home one night, a Detroit sergeant. Mm-hmm. The Farmington Hills police bum rushed him in his driveway and tased him. I remember that. We tried that case in front of the jury, and Police Chief Dwyer was trying to get me to compromise when he said to me in private, I love Afro-Americans. Afro-Americans? What you talking about, sir? We're African-American. We tried that case. The jury came back in 15 minutes saying, how can we prosecute the prosecutor for bringing these bogus charges against Sergeant David Marshall? So yes, I trained them. I trained them in the courtroom, just like they do people out on the street. I do them like that in the courtroom.
Okay. And then another question I have, because Tracy and I are both members of the National Bar Association, which was started in 1925. That's the Black Bar Association. And I've been going for the last 5 years, Ben Crump, Lee Merritt, Chris Stewart. They have the crew, the posse of brothers and some sisters, but mainly brothers, that have been doing these police misconduct cases. And that's one question that has come up. I get referrals too. I called you about a case. Like, how does one identify a viable police misconduct case? Because just because a person has a situation, it doesn't mean that it's a misconduct per se.
The first thing you have to do is get video and see what actually transpired out there on the scene. Absent the video, you really have to vet the case. If there are any witnesses, was anybody else in the car? Was there any damages, bruises, marks, anything of that nature? So you really have to carefully scrutinize the police's conduct and the police's behavior. And at the end of the day, in the majority of cases, the police officer hasn't done anything wrong. You may think the officer has done something wrong because you don't know the law as a civilian. Okay. But they can ask you to get out of your car. They can put handcuffs on you. They can detain you. So it's incumbent upon any person to be as copious as they can with note-taking, etc. So when you sit in the attorney's office, the attorney can explain to you why you have a viable case or you don't. Okay,
and then what are your tips? Just briefly, because I know I do programming. I've done it with Detective Brian Fountain out of Detroit, the Detroit Police Department, and also with Sheriff Jerry Clayton out of Washtenaw County. Who he does trainings and things like that with the police. So what would you say? What are your tips for people if they get stopped by the police?
Plain and simple, comply. Just comply. When a police officer comes up to your car, especially if it's at night, roll all your windows down, cut the overhead lights on. That officer doesn't know you from Adam's house cat, okay? Have your hands at 10 and 2. Ask for permission. If your license is down in the console, tell the officer, is it okay if I take my right hand off of the steering wheel and put it down in the glove compartment to hand you my license? Your battle is not out there on the street because you're never going to lose. You're never going to win it. You're always going to lose it. Your battle is in the courtroom if the officer you feel has done something unjustified or has used excessive force. Comply, comply, comply.
Okay, and then Detective Fountain, he says, comply now, complain later. So I've been using that mantra as well. Comply now, complain later. I want to thank you, Attorney Arnold Reed. If we want to reach you, I know you have a website. Can you tell us what's your website if people need to reach out to you?
My website is arnoldreedlaw.com. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Arnold Reed Law, especially on Instagram because we post things on Instagram, quite a bit, photos, cases I've been involved in. If I can help you out, I would love to serve. And I do programs with the police. Chief Nevis in Farmington Hills, for example, relatively new, took over from Dwyer, a lot more progressive. We've done numerous programs with him, the chief in Southfield as well. So we try to do things that are proactive. But if you need any advice, give me a call and email me, arnoldreedlaw.com or Arnold Reed Law on Twitter and Instagram.
Okay, well, thank you.
Attorney Reed, before you go, I have got to ask this burning question before you leave. I gotta take this opportunity. You talked about video. Your comment, your parting take on what do you think is going to happen with this George Floyd case in Minneapolis?
Well, now that they've got the independent prosecutor, what I'm hoping is that these officers will have a fair trial, obviously. And that's one of the things in this this whole thing we have to remember. I feel that they did wrong based on my legal knowledge and my training. Probably all of America does, but they have to have a fair trial. As heinous as I think the acts are, it's about due process, and they certainly should be afforded and accorded due process. They should be taken to a jury, and the jury needs to decide. It needs to be fair. Unlike, and I know we got to go, the young man that died down in Ferguson, the grand jury, Mike Brown. See, and this is the problem. This is why we have a problem as African Americans. Usually when a grand jury is convened, the prosecutors put on all the evidence. There's no defense evidence at all. A grand jury will indict an empty glass of water. Talk to Kwame Kilpatrick about it. They will. In the case of Ferguson, they didn't get an indictment because the police allowed, the prosecutors allowed the cops to come in and give defense in front of the grand jury. That doesn't happen. They present evidence in order to prosecute and indict. So the system is not fair when it comes to African Americans. It's justice delayed. If you're gonna let a police officer put on evidence that he or she didn't do anything wrong, then you need to do that across the board. You need to let us as victims do the same thing, and they don't do it categorically. What's good for the goose has to be good for the gander. Right. And until they start doing that, prosecutor by prosecutor, until they get rid of the philosophy, it's easy to convict a guilty man. The challenge is convicting an innocent man. We will always have problems in this America.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Attorney Arnold Reed. I anticipate that we will be connecting with you in the future, especially with my programming on what to do when stopped by the police. And, we'll be, as I said, there's a big movement with the National Bar to encourage more attorneys to do police misconduct, or at least bare minimum for those who don't want to do it. At least we need to send the cases to those of you that do these kind of cases, so we can make sure that they get the proper, that our people get the proper representation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. One quick thing, keep your eye out. I'll be on Dr. Phil, and I'll be on the Hollywood Insider Show on police misconduct cases. Keep your popcorn ready. When in need, call Attorney Reed.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Reed.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Okay.
Wow, that was a fascinating talk with Attorney Reed, and I definitely want to check him out on Dr. Phil. He's a veritable expert in his field. So, and you heard what he said about qualified immunity and his take on these different proposed aspects of police reform. I mean, what do you think about them, Robyn? I mean, I didn't get a chance to ask him about his take on, using pattern and practice probes. That's been mentioned by Kamala Harris. I think Kamala Harris has also been proposing a police misconduct registry. Cops do bad, and they have a number of citizens' complaints and lawsuits, successful lawsuits against them, that their name should go on a police misconduct registry. And should we have national standards on police conduct, throughout the country? What do you think?
I think that we need to have standards on a local, state, and national level. Like that's, as I see, that the Congress, the federal, officials are bringing, they want to bring these issues to Congress and to the House and go to the Senate and the president and all that. That's why when I was seeing that, I had previously, I'd reached out to, over the years, I've reached out to my local state rep and state senators, and that's what I would encourage other people to do as well. Is we need to. Well, I was doing a workshop, a program yesterday on reparations, and we were talking about the conditions of Black people with COVID, and does COVID bring a stronger argument for us to have reparations? And my answer, of course, was yes. But we were talking about how there needs to be a spiritual revolution in this country. We have people protesting and marching. There are people that are praying. There are people that are meditating. People need to vote. I know you have your videos. I shared your videos on my social media about getting out the vote and voting for the progressive candidates. Yeah, I know we had Mama Joanne Watson on yesterday. She was talking about HR 40, how they talk about the study for reparations. And then she says they have further legislation talking about the actual remedy. So I think that, you think about, I'm a professor. I teach a class on law and African American experience. So we talk about the slave catchers, what they would do, how slave catchers would be out there, and they would, if a slave runs away, they would go catch the slave. They would track them. They would catch them. They would beat them. They would maim them. Sometimes it might even kill a person to deter other slaves from running away. And when I see these videos of the police, and I mean, I understand, and I have friends that are police officers. Not all police officers are bad people. We know most police officers are good. But I think I am concerned about the training. And I know there's been a lot of discussion in the news about the militarization of the police. When you're seeing, it's just crazy. Like George Floyd, it harkens back to Eric Gardner. We actually in America, we're viewing lynchings of Black people on TV, and that's not right. And then Ahmaud Arbery, he's jogging. You can't even, in America, if you're a Black person, you can't even jog while Black. And then the people who were involved thought that by giving the video to the public that was going to exonerate them. And then they're trying to make it seem like he was breaking into somebody's house, and the person whose house it was said it didn't even matter. And then Breonna Taylor, she just had a birthday on Friday. She would have been 27. I mean, here she is, a first responder, minding her own business in her house. You can't even be in your own house in America without having the risk that the police are going to come up there. And I mean, again, most police officers are good, but there needs to be reprogramming, retraining, reconditioning them as to be agents of healing. And because right now they're agents of kill. For Black people, they are agents to kill. They kill us. We're being killed disproportionately. Black men, women, and children are being killed disproportionately.
This is the thing. I think that society relies too much on law enforcement agencies to be a catch-all for everything. And even these police agencies are saying, hey, look, a significant number of the people that are locked up, detained in jails and in prisons are, quite frankly, mentally ill.
Right.
And they have no business being there. We don't have the resources to treat them. They should be in psychiatric and mental health facilities. So stop dumping and making us, police people with mental health issues. And so we've heard this dialogue about training for law enforcement. And frankly, it hasn't done any good. And so I think that we need real reform now. And you have protesters out here actually calling for the dismantling of police departments and defunding them and actually abolishing police departments. And so where will that leave America if we have no police agencies? Can America police itself? That's a big question mark.
I mean, I think it may be like what Attorney Reed said about community policing. We may need to have more community policing, or more, like I have a number of guides on what to do when stopped by the police. And one of the guides I have is from an activist. He was really upset about what was happening. And he got so upset, he ended up becoming a police officer. And then he does programmings on training the police to have cultural sensitivity. He does mentoring programming for Black children, or for children that are out there. I know that they do that in Detroit at the Detroit Police. They do that, and Washington County Sheriff, they have programming. I know in Canada they have programming where they encourage, and I've done that as well. We need to encourage positive interactions between children and the police. Because, when I do the programs, a lot of times these kids, they have a healthy fear, Black kids in particular. I mean, I'm not going to deny, I'm a Black woman. There are times I'm fearful of the police, but when we do the programs, it's a different tone. We bring the police in and we have them talk about their lives, their perspective, like why, what they do. And I think that helps, because it helps them to have an understanding about, like, okay, what the agenda is of some of the police, most of the police coming in, that they're trying to protect society. So I don't think it should be as far as defunding the police. I think if they're KKK police, though, because like the FBI said there are some KKK police, they need to go.
About,
we need to root out
who are trained and who have taken an oath to protect and serve. Those are the type of police I am referring to. And I took Attorney Reed's point about, when he said that we need to curtail the citizens' ability to use deadly force, because he's exactly right. Most people haven't even been trained on how to use a firearm. And so to have them out here of trying to effectuate a citizen's arrest, they don't know what the hell they're doing. That does need to be abolished, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm all for gun rights, but people have to have, it goes back to the training. People have to be trained. But I just hope that this is an opportunity for a new era in community-based policing. I, for the record, am totally against community policing and these vigilante groups that tend to spring up in response, because once again, they're not properly trained. They take no oath to protect and serve. Listen, we have professional police officers who take an oath to protect and serve, and they're still not doing the job right. So if you have citizens out there going off half-cocked, that to me is a no-go. I'm totally against vigilantism, and in fact, I sued the city of Detroit with respect to a Detroit 300 issue a few years back. So, but again, I just hope this is an opportunity, but there is some for change and for police reform, but there is, I don't know, what do you think? Is this just a temporary moment in time, or will this momentum be sustained and then redirected into real change? Because it really depends on the leadership to put in legislation. You talked earlier in time on this program today about your discussions with your, was it your senator, your state senator?
Yeah, I mean, well, I've reached out to my state rep, my state senator, my Congresswoman, Debbie Dingell. We did a program with her on Friday. We were talking about expungements and federal pardons and the pending legislation here. We've done programming, you and I, on expungement and having you talking about expungement and legislative updates. So I think it's a combination. It's like we need to put pressure on our elected officials, but that we also need to, if the people aren't doing the right things, you got to do protests, march. I also, I did videos on how to protest. If you're going to go out and, you got to be careful though, because you have COVID and tomorrow is day 14 and from marching. And so we probably will be getting some numbers from people that have been out there. So, but some people feel inclined to go out and protest. You can also protest from home. I put up some pictures showing protesting from home, protesting from my office. You can protest on social media. There's TI is calling for a boycott on July 7th.
I'm doing microphone advocacy.
Yep, that's what I'm saying. You've been on social media. I've been on social media. So I think we all have to think about what is I'm a spiritual person. What does the Lord have us to do? What is our part? I also reach out to my friends that are police officers. I talk to them. I'm like, what do you think about this? What is going on? And I understand, from their experience, being a police officer is not an easy job. Like you said, they have to deal with people that have mental health issues, drug issues, and when they're getting trained, it's intense to think that a police officer, they have to be like a doctor. They have to be a mediator. They deal with a lot of stress. Look here in Detroit, you had a couple of officers, deputy sheriffs that died from COVID. You've had doctors that have died in the jail. The criminal defense bar is actively working to get people released from the jail because of the conditions. So it's not.
Yeah, that was Donna Fay who passed away. Donna Fay.
Right, Donna Fay. And another officer. Awesome. And it's not, so being an officer, from just what I see from what the work that the deputies do in the courts and the jails, it's not an easy job. They need to get better pay. They need to have better health care. They need to have better treatment as far as psychological, psychiatric, that you need to have. I know we've talked in the past about having testing, psychological testing. I think they should have testing probably every 6 months, 3 months, depending on what kind of work they're doing. you know.
Right. Listen, I'm not anti-police. In fact, at one point in my life, I was going to become a full-fledged police officer. I actually went to the Detroit Metropolitan Police Academy. I've been trained in firearms, crowd control. I was a police reserve officer in Detroit, and I have several members of my family who are police.
Right.
And so I wouldn't want that job for any amount of money in the world. It is just too it's just too much, you know. I mean, I really, my heart goes out to these police who are put in this position of being the everything to everyone in society. And I think where we're falling short in our law enforcement agencies is leadership. I mean, we've seen that recently in Washington, D.C., where you have POTUS, who is not only calling on the D.C. police to eradicate the protesters out in front of the White House and move them, you know, farther back from Mafia Park, but he's actually calling up National Guard and trying to call up active military. And that shouldn't be happening, and citing the Insurrection Act. I mean, really?
Right.
I
I
mean,
mean,
no
it's
governor across the country is saying, oh, I want you to invoke the Insurrection Act. I mean, that's crazy. And so we'll see what happens in November, on November 3rd, if the American people go to the ballot box and say, hey, I'm fed up with 45 and this has got to stop. I mean, even Republicans are now abandoning him. And I'm so glad that General Mattis spoke up. And now you heard from General Colin Powell today, who's also distanced himself from POTUS as well.
right. I saw that as well. I mean, I think you know, that's you know, I'm a news junkie just as you are. So I will start my day off. I look at the BBC. I try to look at the news and from Africa, from Asia, and I look at the local, state, national news. But I've lived abroad. I've studied international law. So I just think about how embarrassing it is. Like, you know, you see other countries and how they treat their people, but America is looking like that. America is looking like South Africa. I mean, I always talk in my class about how America is an apartheid system, but I mean, it's really looking that way. I mean, Black people being brutalized. Like, I tell my clients in the criminal court, you know, I have mostly Black clients, but I have some working class white clients. And I say, you know, you're caught up in a system that was designed, you know, to oppress Black people, and you're catching hell that you're also catching additional hell for for your, you know, because of this system, because you're part of this system. And then when I think about that, and I saw the man that was in Buffalo, New York, that was pushed down by the police, and they initially said he tripped. They said he tripped, but if you didn't have, but you had the video footage, and I've had clients over the years that have said to me, Miss McCoy, the police did this and this to me, and I'm like, well, do we have medical records? Do we have witnesses? Because a lot of times when you get in front of these jurors in the past, the jurors would just side with the police. I mean, you even see with the cases, and you know, Ben Crump, I see you've got his book Open Season there that we covered in our class. He talks about the cases that have been successful, but that their cases, it's crazy. There are cases that have not been successful because you could have stuff black and white, like Philando Castile, and take it to a jury, and they, you know, Philando Castile, and then Trayvon Martin. I mean, that was like a wannabe cop. You can have cases that are clear as day, but you have jurors. You have some people who are, they just don't see it. When like Attorney Reed said about what a reasonable police officer do, when the police say that they have fear of that Black person, then it's like, oh, well, I can relate. Some of the jurors are probably like, I'm afraid of Black people too. And it's like, it's crazy. It's a crazy.
I think that's the difference between Black and white America when it comes to law enforcement, because as you mentioned earlier, you have a different perspective about police. As a Black woman, you fear the police. Many Black and Latino young people, they fear the police. And so white people have a different perspective, though. Police are good and represent American values, and they're here to protect. Many Black people think that police are about control of Blackness and Black people and domination, because we have seen that ever since the first police department was established in New York City, I believe in 1844, where police have discriminated against Black people, and they have used excessive force.
Right.
Not all police. We do, you know, these well, would hope they're isolated incidents, but they're not isolated incidents anymore. They've become the norm. And so you mentioned earlier about you think that the country is going through a spiritual reawakening, or we need a spiritual reawakening. Why do you think white people are now not being silent and they're marching alongside Black and Latino people in these protests? What has happened? Well, we know George Floyd and his heinous death was a triggering factor, but what has pushed people out on the protest line? Because that's something different.
I think, yeah, I mean, as I've, again, I teach a class, and I mean, even before that with my parents, they made sure I was well versed in Black culture, being in a predominantly white environment. So I think what's different, I mean, you had the civil rights era in the 60s, and you go to the museums and you can see it's on my social media. Attorney Ed Taylor and I go around, you see that there are white people that were involved with the civil rights era, but you have I think what's happening is that you have a higher amount of white people who are, they're for the cause. Like, you've had some of the racists that have died out, and you have higher numbers of white people who are like, you know what? This is wrong. Because, we talk about it before. Racism is like a mental illness. It's a disease, but a mental illness that can be cured. And so I think that you have more people who maybe they've had Black friends, or maybe they've looked on Black media. They've looked at, so you have more people that are tolerant, and they're also fed up. They're seeing what's going on, and they're like, we're not going to accept this anymore. And so I think that I do have hope. I mean, I look at what happened in South Africa. They had apartheid. There was pressures that were put internally from the country and externally, and then they got rid of apartheid. And so I feel that America has that potential, but it's just everybody has to do their part.
But they still have so many problems. They still have so many problems in South Africa. I mean, there's so much corruption. I mean, that is a whole nother show, but at least they did get rid of apartheid. But I hope that there is hope for America. I think so. But people have got to, they've got to participate in these elections coming up. We're just, I think, 57 days away from the Michigan primary and 148 days from the general election in November. And, Black people represent 12% of the national electorate. And if Black people participate in these upcoming elections, Black people can make a real difference in America's future. And Black women have been the most reliable voter base for Democrats, And so I think that, you heard the news. Biden is now the nominee, the official nominee. He's no longer the presumptive nominee.
Right. And I was asked the question about a VP choice, and that's why, in my class we covered Congresswoman Val Demings. I've met her a couple times. I can't say it enough. She's got a background as a police chief in Florida. Black women in the Democratic Party, they keep saying that we're the backbone of the party, and I'm tired of us being in the back. We're the mule of society. I'm tired of us being in the back of the bus, being in the back. It's time for us to be in the forefront, because we always talk with Black women lawyers, Black woman wisdom. There's a lot of Black woman wisdom. We work hard. We take care of our families, our children, our men, and it's we're long overdue to be in the forefront. And I think Congresswoman...
Well, there are other Black women who are in the running for VP. We have Stacey Abrams and, frankly, Kamala Harris. And I don't know, I know that you support Val Demings, but I just don't think she has enough experience. And frankly, I do have a problem with her being a police chief. Well, some people would point to, Kamala Harris, she was Attorney General for California, but Kamala Harris has really done a 180, and she's proven that she is all for police reform. And, she was actually out on the protest lines with her husband recently. It wasn't a media op. She didn't alert the media in advance, but she was definitely out there wearing a mask along with her husband and protesting right along with other people. And so I support Kamala Harris as running mate, or I really love Susan Rice, but I just don't think that she's going to get it. There has been mention of Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, who's been all in the media recently talking about these protests and about reform. And who else? Well, I would love Elizabeth Warren as well. But Amy Klobuchar, no, absolutely not, because I have two problems with Amy Klobuchar. You saw her at George Floyd's funeral the other day in Minneapolis, and she was standing by the casket, and some people said, oh, what, that was a photo op. But, Amy Klobuchar was the Hennepin County prosecutor one time, and she had an opportunity to prosecute defendant number one, Derek Chauvin, who meted out excessive force on the late George Floyd, and she did nothing. She opted not to prosecute him, and there are some on Twitter who are saying, well, if she had done her job, maybe Derek Chauvin wouldn't have been on the force or would have been locked up and wouldn't have been around to become the judge, jury, and executioner of George Floyd. The other problem I have with Amy Klobuchar is the fact that, when Amy Klobuchar was running for president, right along with Kamala Harris was subjected to this double standard. People were, really going at her, coming for her because of her prosecutorial background. But Amy Klobuchar had the same thing, and nobody said anything to her.
Well, I would say, yeah, my as far as Senator Amy Klobuchar, I know she did do a statement. She said that she was initially a part of the process with Chauvin, and then that if somebody else actually did the grand jury. But my response to that, I mean, I met her. She's got a really impressive background. My response, though, is that she didn't make the ultimate decision that resulted in Chauvin being out there. That with his 18 complaints, but it's still, she's part of an office. There needs to be atonement by people who have been involved with this process, prosecutors. There needs to be atonement. Like, okay, maybe she didn't make the direct decision, but she was a part of an office that made a decision that has resulted in police officers out there that are brutalizing Black people. Kamala Harris, I've met her, Senator Kamala Harris. I've read her book. I like her. I talked about her in my class. But some of the younger people had concerns about her being a prosecutor. They expressed that. Stacey Abrams, my aunt has done some things, and we did, when she came here, I encouraged a lot of people to go support her. I have her book. I think she's amazing. Some people, like you said about Val Demings, they said they don't think she has enough experience. It's always interesting though, because I'm like, she got an experience as a Black woman in America. That's a lot of experience. Val Demings, though, with you saying about her being a police chief, I would just say, with this issue about police misconduct, I feel like what better person to help fix the problem than somebody that has been a police chief, that is very close to the subject matter, who's dealt with these issues. Kamala Harris, though, in her book, not just in her book, but in her background, she's done programming to help people. So I think she would be, it's almost like Ben Crump talked about having a task force. They should definitely be a part of the task force. I feel that Senator Kamala Harris would be excellent as an attorney general. Just from what I saw about Congresswoman Val Demings, I like her. I like Stacey Abrams. I mean, a lot of folks. All I got to say is I feel like it should be a Black woman. We have done too much. I like Elizabeth Warren too, Senator Elizabeth Warren. I've read her book. She's very polished, but it's like, the issue is, you got Trump, you got Biden, so you've got some Black people, younger Black people, that are like, I'm not going to vote. So it's like, you've got to do something to inspire not just the Black folks, but the younger people to vote.
There is an enthusiasm gap, and that is why this running mate pick is going to be so very important. And there is some word on the street out there that Biden, if he does get elected, that he may be on one-term president. So whoever the running mate is, whoever the VP is, becomes super important. And I just don't think Val Demings has the experience. I do think Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren have the experience. Quite frankly, Stacey Abrams doesn't either, in my opinion. I do love the idea of Susan Rice. She has, a lot of gravitas there, has total bona fides. But
she's definitely got the credentials. She's got the credentials.
People to the ballot box, whoever it is, because they're going to have to create some enthusiasm to get people to, well, if they're not going to show up to the polling place, to fill out their absentee ballot. Did you get your application yet for the absentee ballot? I got mine the other day.
Yes, I did, and I know, with Black women lawyers, we've been, I know you have a program coming up to talk to Judge Gant about voting, and we have a person that's kind of come and talk about. I know the Deltas are doing some things with the census. So yeah, no, I definitely think we need to encourage people to get out the vote. But I would say this: the Democratic Party needs to be doing stuff now. We need to see action, like we see in court. The judges, you can't just be saying stuff about what your client did. The judges are like, we need to see documentation. I mean, the Black community needs to see receipts from the Democratic Party right now. They could be opening up when they do voter registration. It could be like voter registration, and you can get a COVID test. You could do the census. You could do all at the same time. They could be doing we need to see some benefits, right? Tangible benefits into the Black community right now, helping them with substance abuse issues, with mental health issues, with food, housing. We need to see some receipts right now, not just waiting for November and January, but it's like, we built this country, and it's time for America to pay on its receipts. I mean, Martin Luther King talked about, it's like, we got a check for insufficient funds from America. We built it. We fought in every war, from the Civil War all the way up to Vietnam, to the Gulf War, to the present moment. We are, for America, Black folk are like ride or die for America, but America is not doing this, treating us, showing us the same kind of love. America needs to be the ride or die for Black Americans. It's just not happening.
I totally agree, but you have millennials and Gen Zers who are not going to be ride or die because they feel as if their votes are taken for granted by the Democratic Party. There was a lot of enthusiasm for Senator Bernie Sanders when he was running, and since he got knocked out of the primary, frankly, that enthusiasm has whittled away. So the Democrats are going to have to step it up. All those ideas that you mentioned were fantastic, because frankly, there are going to be many people, and it's not just Gen Zers and millennials, but frankly, Gen Xers on up, who are just going to stay at home if Democrats don't wrap it up for November, because their thing is this. Look, we've been supporting the Democratic Party for decades, and we have been voting and we've been supporting, and there has been no change. And so what is going to be different this time around? So I really do think the Black vote defines American politics. You're going to see it now more than ever in this election cycle, 2020.
That's correct.
And I'm just hopeful that they're going to bring it home. I think that Joe Biden's actual biggest opponent is the enthusiasm gap, and not Trump, because Trump is just, done himself in. And that will, of course, favor the Democrats come November. But Trump still has his base, and they cannot be underestimated. And they do get out and vote, whether it's going to be in person at the polls or filling out that absentee ballot.
Right. I mean, I've met VP Joe Biden. He was very personable. He's very warm. Yes, he flubs up when he talks. Sometimes he's human. But that's why he needs to have a superstar VP sitting there, right there with him. Like, look, ride or die. Like I said, we have been ride or die. Black people have been ride or die for America. America and the Democratic Party needs to be ride or die for us. And we need to have equity demands. Or justice demands equity, just like with the way we're getting treated by the police, mistreated. It needs to be the same. Like, you look at the Buffalo case with a quickness. They hurried up and they fired the police. It was like boom, boom, boom. It needs to be like that for the black cases too.
Those two cops that got suspended. I saw the video clearly. Martin Gugino, the 75-year-old tall white guy who got knocked over by the police, was knocked over by that cop. And there was another cop who actually went to, reach down and render some assistance, and the other cops just kind of sped him along, like leave that guy, as a lump on the sidewalk. Well, the two cops that were involved, they got suspended, and then I understand that the whole unit resigned.
Right, and that's intense. We got definitely some intense stuff going on. But I know we're about to run out of time. So I know I've been talking to some special guests. I'm not going to mention them until we get some confirmations, but it's been a pleasure doing this with you, this Politico Coffee. with Robyn, attorney Robyn McCoy, who I can be followed at Robyn Legal, www.robyn Legal, and attorney Tracy Martin. And how do we follow you, Tracy?
Well, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter as Miss Justice at Attorney Tracy 1. I am going to be rolling out a couple of new websites in connection with my big news about the launching of my new political podcast, and you're going to be hearing more about that in the recent days. But I do want to again plug that I am going to, well, first of all, on Tuesday, June 9th, I'm going to be interviewing Sri Tanadar. He is the candidate for Michigan House District 3. He's running for state representative this time, folks. You know, he ran for governor, and Detroit embraced him. And he said that District 3 is the district that really embraced him. And that's why he moved to run, and he's ready to serve. So I'm going to be interviewing him on Tuesday at 7 p.m. on his Facebook Live at Sri Tanadar for state representative. So check that out. And then on Saturday, June 20th at 12 noon, I'll be interviewing the Honorable Kamisha G. Gantz. She's out of 6th Judicial Circuit Court in Oakland County. And yes, we're going to be talking about voter rights, how to register to vote, how to vote absentee, and why it's important to flip the ballot and vote for the all-important judicial races.
Right, that's wonderful. And I have some programming coming up, but you can check it out if you go to robynlegal.com, and it's Robyn with a Y. And I'm connecting everything. So I'm on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Giving a shout out to my techie person who's actually here with me today, Kyle Caldwell. Kyle is great. Yeah, he said the younger generation is bringing it home, helping me to figure out, navigate this technology, all of us. So, well, you have a blessed day, and everybody be safe. And, no justice, no peace, protest.
Prosecute that, please.
Yep. Just protest however you see fit, whether it's going to the streets, at your house, in the office, meditate, pray. It's about the collective consciousness. Yep.
Right.
So,
Restorative justice, America. Please reform now.
Yes.
See ya.
Okay.
Political diva out.
All right.
Talk to you later.
See you later. Robyn Legal out.
Bye. Bye, Kyle.
Bye-bye.
All right, press stop. Oh, how do I press stop? I do. So to stop recording or just end it? Okay. Oh, thank you. And then how do I?